Growing a company as an entrepreneur is a lot like climbing a mountain. And you know that the view from the mountaintop is going to be awesome. You know that when you get there, it is going to be well worth everything that it took to get to that point. But when you're climbing that mountain, there is always going to be a rock in the road. There's always going to be something that's going to get in the way of you being able to climb this mountain effectively. And you get to decide, what am I going to do with this rock in the road? Am I going to get out some dynamite and blow it up? Am I going to climb it and then get myself back on the other side of it to keep going? Am I going to go around it? Am I going to dig a hole underneath it? Or am I going to look at it and say, no way, this rock is not movable. I'm going to head in the other direction. I'm going to backpedal for a little while, find a new path, and keep climbing this mountain. And this is something that we all encounter. If this is something that you think, oh my gosh, why does this keep happening to me in entrepreneurship? Why do I keep running into these rocks in the road? It's because maybe the people that you're following just don't talk about it enough, because it's something that everybody encounters. Anybody who has climbed the mountain or started to climb the mountain and pretends that there's no rocks in the road and that it's all just wonderful and easy is probably just not telling you the truth. Okay, so let's just put that out there right now. But what happens is that when we don't know that this is normal, or we aren't prepared to be flexible, and that's the key here, is I think underneath the core attribute of resilience is flexibility. When we haven't conditioned ourselves to be flexible, then it's very stressful as an entrepreneur. So today, in today's episode, I want to talk to you about how to be flexible when we're growing a business. When we get to the point where we're encountering this rock in the road, what do we do? How do we handle it? And how can we make it easier on ourselves by having that mindset of flexibility when things go wrong, so that we don't keep bumping up against ourselves while climbing the mountain? So stay tuned, and I will be sharing more on exactly how to do this in this upcoming video podcast. Hi, my name is Laura Meyer. I'm a growth strategist to some of the country's top companies. I'm also a book author, a 5-week best-selling book author of Win-Win, and I'm a mom, and I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years now. So I've definitely encountered my share of adversity. And I want to share a story with you that was so interesting that happened this week that reminded me of how important it is to be flexible on how we grow our businesses, or what we do when we encounter these obstacles. That was not related to business. It was actually related to tennis. So earlier this week, there was an emergency in our community. A prisoner, a man who is a murderer, escaped our local prison, scaled the wall, made the news, and he is on the run. In fact, 7 days later, when I'm recording this podcast, he is still on the run. At first, I think everybody assumed, oh, he'll get caught, not a problem. There's a lot of people around here that nobody looks like, and we're bringing in law enforcement, and we have dogs and helicopters, and we'll find this guy. Well, we can't find this guy. He keeps robbing houses and eluding police enforcement, and it's really stressful. So I woke up on Tuesday morning and found out that our kids' school was canceled because the man, this criminal, was seen near some of the schools that are in our school district. Well, needless to say, of course, it's completely nerve-wracking. We fortunately have a very loud and obnoxious dog in our house, but that was like my only peace of mind, that we live in this area where the search is taking place. So I had a tennis match scheduled on Tuesday morning. So we all, and it's in a neighboring community where the tennis team and the tennis match was to take place. So we get in touch with the captain of the opposing team, and we're like, hey, listen, like there's a murderer in the woods, literally. We are going to stay home with our kids. And the opposing captain was having none of it. We were hearing things like, oh, well, we were inconvenienced too, or I had to come back from my beach vacation early for this match. And of course, that didn't go over really well with our team or our captain. We were kind of like, there's a killer in the woods. Like, let's not do this right now. Like, we're all trying to figure out how we're going to manage childcare and how we're going to manage our work schedule and if our community's safe. And like, can we just move on from the fact that tennis is not that important compared to what's happening here? And these ladies were really inflexible. So I was thinking to myself, like, I ended up getting on the phone with one of them that I knew. And I said, listen, I really like you. We see each other around, but I could not disagree with you more on this particular issue. This is ridiculous. You need to let it go and allow us to reschedule and not give us a hard time and not bring it up to the cup board, which is the governing body for this particular tennis match, and like go on with your day knowing that none of us want this to happen. But she was so stuck on what she thought should be the way that morning was supposed to go, like very rigid about it. And there was no flexibility. And it was just so interesting to me because, of course, again, I think we were already all stressed as moms given the situation. And then we were kind of like, it got contentious, which is not always my personal style. Like, normally I'm not that way, but I think we were all just so freaked out by the situation. But ultimately, I left that encounter wondering, why? Why is it that we are so attached to the way that we think things should be, that even when there is such a big emergency, we can't be flexible? There's something about our brains being attached to and married to and having this formula for what we want to be true, that it was impossible to be able to come up with other solutions with this opposing team. In a lot of ways, I think we do this to ourselves. I think a lot of times we think it shouldn't be this hard or it shouldn't be this way. And you might be wondering, okay, Laura, why are we talking about this on a marketing tech podcast? Because marketing and technology have variables that enter into the mix every single day, every single week that we didn't anticipate, we couldn't have any control over, and that we get to decide what we're going to do with that rock in the road. It happens all the time. I could give you 2 quick examples of how this impacted our clients in the last few days. One example is that Facebook ad targeting was incorrectly put into place by one of the client's team members. She went in and changed the targeting variables, and the campaign didn't work as well as we were hoping. It was a waste of money and a pretty big mistake. But again, we have to keep going. We can't get hung up on that. That is a very a common example of things that go wrong when a marketing campaign is deployed. And when it comes to tech, just within the last week or two, we had to upgrade all of our clients to a new level of what's called A2P compliance, which is outbound texting compliance. And because a lot of our AI systems are based on SMS texting, we ended up having to create this whole new legal component to our organization that wasn't planned on, nobody's reimbursing me for, and one of our biggest clients is still not approved for. We're still continually trying to push their approval through. So it's, again, these are things that happen all the time. And what happens is I think when we get so attached to the way that things should be, it's harder to move through these challenges. Or we might be saying, well, it shouldn't be this way, or this shouldn't have ever happened, or I should have been told earlier, or this should be easier. There's no upside to thinking about it that way in business. There's nothing good that's going to come out of that. It's just going to create stress for you and your team. And then a lot of times you miss out on opportunities because we're so caught up in this formula or this prescription or this manual in our heads of how we think business should go. So here are some tips on what I would recommend doing if you find yourself in this position of having to be flexible, but also being really stressed out by not wanting to be flexible, which I think many of us experience, particularly if we're tired or we're just had a day or it's the end of the week or whatever. So the first is really to make sure that you have a mental plan for how you're going to respond to situations that are outside of your control. Like, make sure that mentally you're not surprised by the rock in the road. And I think what happens is, as entrepreneurs, we are incredibly optimistic. As entrepreneurs, we think we can beat the odds, because if we didn't believe that, we would have never started out in entrepreneurship, right? Most businesses don't make it. So we're naturally positive. We're naturally optimistic. We naturally think there is not going to be a rock in the road, which is a good attribute. That's what gets us started. But then it can also create a lot of stress when we encounter that obstacle and we think, oh my gosh, like, I didn't know this was happening, or I joined this program, or I became part of this business model because I thought it was this way. Well, now this is happening and I didn't count on that. And it's creating so much turmoil in my brain, right? So just know the unexpected will happen. You want to, in business, always leave margin for things to go wrong. I'm a very experienced marketer. I would be considered one of the top marketers in my niche. And still, when something goes out perfectly, I think of it as like a miracle. It is not typical. Sometimes people respond, or ads perform, or creative goes in one direction versus another. And this is very typical. That's why we monitor it. And a lot of what I do is help my clients realize that it is in the implementation of marketing. It's in how we continually adjust to the information that we're receiving that gets them the result, not this perfectly created strategy up front. We create it based on our abilities, based on my experience, based on a little bit of intuition and what I call the sniff test, which tends to be pretty accurate at this point. But still, we stay flexible, because an adjusted campaign will always outperform a campaign that doesn't have that adjustment along the way. The second is just becoming very unattached to how you get the result. So this is something that I learned from Brooke Castillo, who I love her podcast, The Life Coach School. And when I learned this about entrepreneurship, it was so helpful to me, which is to become unattached to how you get to that destination. So have big goals. Have big revenue goals, have those numbers in your head, really encourage your team and lead your team around those big goals, and make sure that everybody is motivated and aligned around where you're going and why you want to get there, and how you'll all celebrate together when you achieve that next milestone. And it's important to be very open to how you get there. It's important to be so open to the how, because if you're not open to the how, so stay committed to the what, but be open to the how. Be unattached to the how, so be committed to the outcome, but not the path to get there. Because if you're climbing that mountain, right, you're climbing that mountain, there's a rock in the road, and you're like, no, this is the path. This is the path. I already mapped it out in my strategic plan, in my planning process, in my quarterly plan. This is the path. This rock should not be here. And it might not be a rock that you blow up, dig up, walk around, or climb. It might be one of those rocks where you back up and choose another path. If you can't be flexible in that way, what happens is you keep creating these ceilings. You keep creating these revenue plateaus, because we're so committed to the how, which is great, but that inflexibility prevents you from being open to available alternatives on the path to success. And the third is really making sure that you have the ability to overcome adversity and have some mantras, knowing that all adversity has a purpose, right? So knowing adversity is a constant, but it serves that positive purpose. It's a tool for growth and improvement. When you can start looking at it that way, then you can start moving through it a lot more with a lot more ease and flow. So here's just some of my mantras. The first is, we'll figure it out. We always do. So I say this to my team all the time. Like, something will come up and I'll be like, I don't know about that one. Like, for example, this tax compliance issue that we recently had. And I was like, you know what? we'll figure it out. We always do. And when you say that out loud, you usually do. It's kind of amazing how that works. And the second that we often hear ourselves saying, and I say it a lot, and now at this point I hear my team saying it a lot, which is, I'm glad we ran into this issue, so now we know what to do next time. Right. And this is such a mindset shift, particularly for really strong operations team members who might be very, very good at process and a little frustrated when their process doesn't go perfectly. This is a great mantra for that team member where you can say, I'm glad we ran into this. Like, good, we ran into this. Now we have a system. Now we have a process. So next time it happens, we know exactly what to do. And that mantra tends to do really, really well with anybody who's like, oh, this shouldn't be happening. And if you're that person in your mind where you're like, oh, this shouldn't be happening, I recommend that you try saying that to yourself. And this is something I say to myself a lot of times if I find myself really frustrated by, just how hard sometimes entrepreneurship is. I will say, you know what, this is what separates the women from the girls. And I will often jokingly say it to my staff, or I will say it to myself, but it's true. This is what separates people who are just starting out in business, who are pretty green, who maybe have all of that optimism within them, which is great, but really haven't encountered any major issues yet, to the ones that are able to grow and mature as entrepreneurs, the ones that are able to build and then exit and then build again. These moments are what separates those two levels of sophistication in business. So remember, the secret is to overcoming adversity is that it will always be there. It's not going to go away. And being able to stay flexible is part of the big picture that I want to recommend that you consider, which is that every time that you run into a rock in the road, it has a positive purpose. You're supposed to learn from it. You're supposed to become better for it. And knowing that there is a balance, there's times where you're just like, I just cannot deal with this rock today. I'm going to take a step back, take a breather, do some yoga, play some tennis, and come back to it later. And a lot of times that is enough for me to know what to do with that rock. But just know the view gets better and better the more times that you can overcome this adversity. So my question to you, if you're listening to this, is what was the last time that you dealt with major adversity in the business, and how did you handle it? And if you might be thinking, oh, gosh, I don't know, it might be something that you're just reacting and responding to without even realizing it. I know in the first probably decade of being an entrepreneur, that's 100% me. I just reacting, responding, very reactive, right? And then as we just have more and more experience as entrepreneurs, we start to notice, this feels familiar. I think I've run into this before. Last time this happened, I know exactly what went down, and I don't think I want it to go that way again. And what you'll find is you start just building that resilience through flexibility. So I just want you to notice, are you reacting all the time, or are you able to stay in that steady state irregardless of what's happening in your business? Let me know. I would love to hear from you. You can comment below this video, or if you're listening to the podcast, just leave me a message on Instagram or your favorite platform. And if you loved this episode, or if you were talking about this very issue with a friend recently, I would really appreciate it if you shared this episode with maybe someone you know, or you left a review if you're listening to the podcast. As always, I really appreciate you being here, and I'll see you next time on the AI Driven Marketing Podcast.